What's wrong with the world? Hi, I'm Mike Mason. This is the Immortal Combat Podcast. The Immortal Combat Podcast is a podcast arm of Very Christie. Very Christie is a Catholic lay apostolate devoted to help men attain the full stature of Christ by growing strong in mind, body, and spirit. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can check us out online at verychristie.com. All right, gentlemen, welcome to the Intro to Spiritual Theology, episode 6. We are in month 2 of a 6-month series on the introduction to spiritual theology. This week, the question before us is, what is wrong with the world? All right. The London Times, back in the early 20th century, the London Times, the newspaper, sent out an inquiry to a bunch of famous authors in England, asking the question, what's wrong with the world today? The Catholic author G.K. Chesterton responded simply, Dear sir, you ask what is wrong with the world today. I am, sincerely, G.K. Chesterton. That is the perfect answer to what's wrong with the world. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet dissident who left the communist Russia, he once remarked that the line between good and evil passes straight through the human heart. He is correct there too. Guys, what is wrong with the world is us, okay? A lot of people focus on, to change the world, make it better, we have to look at a bunch of other things. The place we should start is within ourselves, okay? Now, last week, we talked about the state of original justice, the state of Adam and Eve in the garden. We will review that here in a minute. But this week, we're going to talk about what happened to us in original sin. Original sin is what we have bequeathed from Adam and Eve, our forebears. It's the stain that's on our soul when we are conceived and when we're born that God has to remedy if we want to have friendship, if he wants us to have friendship with him. Okay. So we need to have a clear understanding what this problem is, so that we can understand adequately the solution. Okay. So this week we'll talk about the original sin. Next week we're going to talk about personal sins, both mortal and venial. And then the last week of this month, week 4 of this month, we're going to talk about the notion of salvation from a Catholic perspective. We're going to take like a 30,000 foot view of salvation, what's going on there. Salvation is a complicated topic. So we're just going to look at some basics. And then the final 4 months, we're going to talk about engaging in spiritual combat. So, all right, let's launch in. Original justice. Original justice is the condition of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were given 3 gifts, as we talked about last week: the natural gift of existence, the supernatural gift of sanctifying grace, and the preternatural gifts of immortality, immunity from suffering, fused knowledge, and integrity. All right, what then is original sin? Original sin is the privation of original justice inherited at birth. What's that mean? What that means is when we are born into a state of original sin isn't so much something that we have. It's not like you're born with cancer that you have to be healed of. It's more accurate to think of what we don't have. Of the 3 gifts, the natural gift, the supernatural gift, and the preternatural, when we are born in a state of original sin, we retain the natural gift, but not the supernatural or preternatural gifts. They're gone. Okay. When we are born, we are not friends with God because we need sanctifying grace for that. So we're not born. Now, it is true that our nature is harmed due to original sin, which we're going to talk about. I'll elaborate more on here in a minute. But our nature is not destroyed by original sin. Okay. All right. So let's go a little bit deeper on this. What are the chief punishments of original sin? The chief punishments we inherit are death, suffering, ignorance, and a strong inclination to sin. In short, we retain the natural gift, we lose the supernatural and preternatural. Okay. Let's unpack this. Point number 1. The fact of original sin explains why we are so tempted to evil and why it's so easy to turn from God. So if you guys ever wonder, like, why is it so evil to do, or so easy to do bad stuff? But even trying to do the smallest thing for God, saying your daily morning offering, going to mass, on things that aren't even that big a deal, very difficult. Well, 1, it can be temptation from outside of us, like, the devil can be whispering in your ear. But a lot of times it's just the fact that our original sin makes it so that we don't want to do those things, that we're attracted to this worldly things and we tend to avoid or ignore or forget about eternal things and about God. Original sin explains that. Okay. Second, because of original sin, the mind of man has a difficulty knowing necessary truths about God, our world, and ourselves. We easily fall into errors, and we are inclined to temporal rather than eternal things. So, as human beings, we should be inclined to eternal things like God, like growing in virtue, like the truth, stuff like that. Instead, people find themselves inclined to, food, drink, and sex, having a good time, playing video games, going on vacation. People tend to worry about getting a degree and making lots of money, and we tend to be very this worldly. And the more you study the Catholic faith and the more you grow in holiness, what you will realize is many, 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 many people in our society don't give a passing thought to the things of God at all. Even some people who claim to be religious. It's almost shocking where you realize, like, holy cow, people just don't think about God at all. Okay. Not good. Original sin accounts for why that's so easy to do. Third thing, the penalties of original sin: death, suffering, ignorance, and a strong inclination to sin. They remain after baptism. Even though you're baptized, you're still going to die someday. Even though you're baptized, you're still going to suffer. Even though you're baptized, you're going to be ignorant of God and his law. Even though you're baptized, you're going to have a strong inclination to sin. This is one of the reasons why this podcast is called the Immortal Combat Podcast. Why? Because we have to fight. Fight what? Death, suffering, ignorance, and temptation. The effects of original sin have to be fought. Now, the good news is we don't have to fight alone. God's going to come out and give us graces and sacraments and all these tools to help us, which is what this series is about. But it's a fight nonetheless, man. So if you're going to live a good and holy life, you got to fight. Okay. And we need men to be fighters. Fourth thing, although we have a strong inclination to evil as a result of original sin, our nature is not evil in itself. This is really important. Okay. When we say we have an inclination to evil, I'm not saying that people who are not in a state of grace can't be decent. Not saying that. Or they can't know things about God or the moral law. Not saying that. The everyday person who's in a state of original sin, okay, and let's say they have a decent upbringing, they can be decent people. Okay, they can be good neighbors. They can even ask good questions. They can even provide some good answers about God and the world and things. What can't they do? They cannot remain free of mortal sin for very long. Now, if they have good character, maybe they can remain free of mortal sin for a week or two. If they have bad character, maybe an hour or two. But original sin says we are inclined to sin. Original sin guarantees that we will commit mortal sin at some point. Okay. What it doesn't say, though, is that we can't do anything good. When you meet Protestants believe everything we do is sinful because they think our nature is completely fallen. That's not accurate. Okay. We believe that people can be decent, but they cannot conquer sin. They cannot get to heaven. They cannot do good works that please God. You have to have grace for that. Okay. So, that being said, what is the remedy of original sin? The remedy of original sin is baptism. The graces of baptism confer justification into a person. Justification means you and God are on friend terms now. So when you're justified, you and God are cool. Okay. Now, when a person's justified through baptism, two basic things happens. First, there's an eradication of all sins, original and personal, mortal and venial, all of them. So if you get baptized late in life, you get a clean slate. Okay, everything is forgiven. All right. This is why guys who are going to get baptized don't have to go to confession first, because baptism takes care of all of it. Second, you get an inner sanctification. So at baptism, God's going to wipe out all of your sin, and then he's going to infuse sanctifying grace in your soul. And what that grace does is it allows you to be friends with God. It gives you the power necessary to grow in holiness. Okay. With that infusion of grace, you also get faith, hope, and charity. You also get moral virtues and the gifts of the Holy Spirit. They all come in together. And so as you start to grow in your faith, as you start to grow in holiness, your capacity to exercise those gifts will increase. Okay. So just because you have them all doesn't mean you can use them all yet. You have to work up to that, but they're there nonetheless. Okay. Um, that's the basic gist. So baptism solves it. So if you guys aren't baptized, you need to seriously think about doing that. Okay. So you can be welcomed into the family of God. If you are baptized and maybe you haven't been to confession in a while, maybe you've committed some mortal sins, you got to get your butt to confession. Okay. To heal that stuff. Other thing, if you are baptized and as far as you can tell, you're in a state of grace, God has given you everything you need to grow in holiness. So when we do our rule of life, okay, we live this rule of life we're living. When we're getting to Mass on Sunday, when we're saying our daily prayers, what we're doing is we're disposing ourselves so that God can fill us more with His grace and mercy. Okay, we're becoming vessels through which He can work with. Okay, so when I encourage you guys, the meditation the last 2 weeks of original justice and original sin, have a clear-eyed understanding of where we came from, have a clear-eyed understanding of where we are and where God wants to take us, which we talked about last month, and start recognizing that through your baptismal graces, through the graces God offers you, through the sacraments, through the church, God equips you to not only fight the spiritual life, but to win. Okay. We have everything we need to defeat the world, the flesh, and the devil. What we're going to talk about next week is personal sin and mortal and venial. Okay. Then we're going to talk about basic units of salvation. And then the last 4 months of this series, at least, we're going to talk about how to start growing in holiness. All right. So we're buttoned up against that 12-minute mark. That's a good place to stop. So, fellas, I hope you got something out of this, that you enjoyed it. Remember, all the notes are on the website. So if you want to go back and look at what I'm looking at when I do these talks, a great way to do this is to listen and follow along in the notes. You'll learn a lot doing that. And remember, I always try to keep these about 10 to 12 minutes so that you guys can devote some time to your theological formation, but also take care of the other business you have to do in life. So speaking of which, we are at the 12:15 mark, so I will sign off. Have a great week, fellas. God bless.